Thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring this investigation. Check out the link in the description to receive 2 free months of premium online classes. And be sure to stick around after this episode to see how Skillshare can keep you off the UN-mandated Basic Assistance Program. The failure of the League of Nations was a defeat to the concept of international idealism and emboldened the most tyrannical regimes across the world. But even as the great powers fought across the battlefields of Europe, Africa, and Asia, the seeds of a new world order were already being planted. In 1942, the United States, United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, and the Republic of China formalized their alliance in the Declaration by United Nations. When the war ended, this declaration had expanded to include 47 national governments and served as the basis of the United Nations, an intergovernmental organization dedicated to establishing international cooperation. In the ensuing decades, the UN expanded to include nearly every sovereign state on Earth. Its members fought for international peace and security, promoted human rights, and delivered humanitarian aid. Despite its idealistic goals, the UN struggled to maintain peace and legitimacy in many countries. Indecisive blunders in peacekeeping missions in places like Rwanda and Bosnia failed to prevent widespread genocides, and this trend of messy and indecisive military intervention continued well into the 21st century. Somewhat ironically, the UN's greatest success was in its efforts off-world. While individual nation-states had spearheaded mankind's first forays into space exploration, when the first colonies were established on the Moon and Mars, it was the UN that became responsible for coordinating their logistics. On Earth, the effects of sustained climate change had brought the planet's ecosystem to the brink of total collapse. National governments floundered in the face of this calamity and turned to the UN for leadership. Utilizing techniques in environmental manipulation first developed on Mars, combined with its sophisticated administrative apparatus, nations that submitted to UN authority saw progress and prosperity slowly return. With this success came increased political clout, until the majority of the world's nations had united under its authority. While Martian technologies and personnel had helped prevent the worst effects of climate change on Earth, by the beginning of the 23rd century, tensions between the UN and its Martian colonies were rising. Mars, now nearly a self-sufficient colony, called for independence, evoking in its rhetoric the historic struggles against imperialism and exploitation. Their demands were repeatedly rejected by the UN. Tensions between the two powers escalated, and the UN invoked the breakaway province rule, sending a fleet of ships to Mars to enforce their hold on the territory. In the intervening travel time, however, the development of the Epstein drive on Mars had dramatically changed the balance of power, and negotiations between the United Nations and Mars ended with the establishment of the independent Martian Congressional Republic. In exchange, the UN acquired access to the underlying technology of the Epstein drive, allowing its ships to further expand into the solar system, establishing colonies on dozens of moons and asteroids well beyond the previous limits of human exploration. These new colonies allowed the UN to harvest the immense mineral wealth of the outer solar system, and these resources were sent back to Earth to be processed and utilized in nearly every industry. Despite a loose military coalition between Earth and Mars and joint responsibility for patrolling the increasingly lawless belt, tensions between the two powers never fully parted. This rivalry and race for territory and political influence lasted well into the 24th century, until the Martian Congressional Republic finally declared war on the UN for their supposed involvement with the destruction of the Martian battleship Doniger. The revelation that the destruction of the vessel and the subsequent death of the entire population of the aerospace station was the fault of the private corporation Protogen prevented the conflict from escalating out of control and brought the return of an uneasy peace. The United Nations remains the single largest power in the solar system in terms of population, economic potential, and industrial capacity. With few minor exceptions, it is the sole governing body of Earth, Luna, and maintains hundreds of orbital stations and colonies across moons and asteroids in the solar system. A representative democracy, executive power of the United Nations is shared between the Office of the Secretary General,
also
who
they're
serves as the head
public.
of state and commander-in-chief, as well as the United Nations Security Council. The Security Council is comprised of very few UN undersecretaries and military officers, and is responsible for most interplanetary military deployments and foreign affairs. The complex and at times contradictory nature of the UN's administration has led to the formation of dozens of political blocs, ideological wings, task forces, and special offices. These vary from officially sanctioned organizations to unofficial groups working behind the scenes. The most prominent of these wield significant influence, and even the Secretary General must at times work through them to achieve his or her mandates.
What's my job?
To keep your daughter safe. What's wrong with Daddy?
She got infected.
Daddy fed you.
January 17th.
Look, I thought the millions going to migrants every day was bad enough, but wait till you hear about this. Uncle Sam just loves spending on every...
Military headquarters are located in New York City, but other departments are located across the rest of the planet or on Luna. Having totally subsumed its founding nation states, the UN governs Earth through a series of regional administrative zones. These shared interest zones are determined by the common interests of the people within them. Their boundaries, at times, bear little relation to historical, political, ethnic, religious, or cultural borders, and have only been partially successful at maintaining global unity. The vast majority of the UN citizens reside on Earth, which has developed into a highly stratified society. Burdened by overpopulation and scarce resources, most live in poverty, forced to rely on basic government assistance to survive. Those on basic have access to shared accommodations, minimal health care, and recycled paper clothing, and face numerous restrictions on their freedom of movement and ability to reproduce. Only a small number of legal births are permitted each year, determined through a regular baby lottery. While largely uneducated and absent from the greater UN economy, there exists a vibrant barter economy within the basic population and a sophisticated gray market. The only way off basic is through employment or education, both of which require a significant investment of work credits to prevent resources from being wasted on those who will not utilize them properly. The uplift programs are highly competitive, and for most, a life on basic is all they will ever know. Those who achieve sustained employment, however, gain access to a much higher quality of life. In addition to better civil services, access to high-quality food and medical services, they also have the ability to purchase land and property. Even among the employed, however, the baby tax is usually prohibitively expensive, and groups of people will often form civil unions to share the financial burden of raising a child. The lack of opportunity on Earth has pushed many of the UN citizens to seek a new life in space. For the select few afforded the opportunity to seek work on Luna or the Belt, they can find a measure of freedom unheard of among those on basic, and even many of the employed. The most common avenue of leaving Earth is a career in the military. Primarily a spaceborne force, its two largest branches consist of the United Nations Navy and the United Nations Marine Corps.
Hoorah.
The UN Navy is the largest within the solar system and operates numerous classes of warship, ranging from immense dreadnoughts and battleships to smaller cruisers, frigates, and escorts. Its fleets are spread throughout the solar system, deployed on far-ranging missions to maintain stability across the belt. The UN Marine Corps are likewise the largest land force within the solar system, fielding over 100 million personnel. Earth's higher gravitational force, when compared with Mars or the Belt, gives these Marines a considerable advantage against those accustomed to lower gravity. While both these forces maintain a massive numerical superiority over the Martian Congressional Republic, their next largest rival, the economic strain on military development and procurement is severe. Most UN warships and divisions are technologically behind compared to their Martian counterparts, and projections place the two powers at relative parity. For most on Mars and even some on Earth, the United Nations is seen as a declining power, the sick man of the solar system. Its people are portrayed by foreign media as lazy, coddled, and oppressed under the rich and powerful. While such sentiments are rooted in the reality of life on Earth, it remains at the center of human civilization. Whatever future awaits mankind, it will be decided in part by the United Nations. Are you worried about ending up on basic and living in the slums of a UN shared interest zone? Consider using Skillshare so you can join the classes and communities that are just right for you and your New Year goals. Skillshare is an online learning community for creators with more than 25,000 classes in design, business, and more. Exactly the sort of thing valued by employers within the Belt, Almuda, or even here on Earth. Whether you want to fuel your curiosity, creativity, or even career, Skillshare is the perfect place to keep you learning and thriving in 2019. So stop simply surviving on your UN-mandated nutrition slime and join more than 7 million creators on Skillshare. We'd recommend Storytelling Fundamentals, Character Conflict, Context, Craft by author Daniel Jose Older, and Fictional Universe Storytelling, Outline Your Epic Adventure by Michael Delgado. It's also super affordable. An annual subscription is less than $10 a month. Anyone who uses the link in the description will get special consideration in the UN Baby Lottery and a free 2-month trial of Skillshare Premium.